The first duty of government is to protect our rights.
It's our job to maintain the proper role of government in what we were tasked to do.
In the Idaho Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, we have a right to life, we have a right to defend life.
This legislation is centered on meeting the needs of Idaho families.
And we have no way to maintain control over the spending of this program, and it will be a disaster for this state long term.
But we have a whole gamut of kids whose parents would like to do something for them and they cannot.
The courts have long held that our ability to transfer title on real property benefits society as a whole.
This is simply about putting it out of reach of young, innocent, vulnerable children and making our libraries and schools a safe place for them to go.
And I am increasingly frustrated that we cannot stop ourselves from drinking at the public trough.
He's sounding the alarm. He's saying if we don't address these issues, we potentially might have greater problems moving forward.
I feel like we're back to an unappointed board that gets to decide who is essential and who is non-essential.
If I was looking at a business and I was looking at these figures, there would be heads rolling because this is unsustainable.
We're supposed to be bottom-up government. We're supposed to be representing my citizens' ideas and your citizens' ideas, and we're supposed to be discussing them and debating them to come to a conclusion.
And for me, it's about a couple things. It's about food security, it's about national security, and it's about preserving American exceptionalism.
The First Amendment and our freedom of religion, freedom of speech are our first liberties. They are so important. We don't have the rest without them.
Well, it's a bonus day for this year. Leap Day, February 29, 2024. Welcome to the program. My name is Matt Edwards, and the signal is live on the air. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a lot to cover today. I am... there were some things that developed. There were some things that I learned this morning that were shocking to me and shocking to some other folks too. And so we need to get to it, but we're going to do this one thing at a time. We've got a few guests that will join us later to cover a couple of topics. So this is a jam-packed show today. We may go into overtime. I'm just warning you. We got an extra day. We might as well use it to our advantage. So we may go into overtime. Just warning you now. The first thing that we need to address is that the House and Senate are in session right now. We were expecting once again to go live to the House, but we're not going to because the first two bills that were on the list, they've pushed into the next day again, particularly House Bill 538, which was the compelled speech bill that would have compelled government employees to use basically to lie when talking about pronouns, people's pronouns and stuff. So they skipped it again, once again. So tomorrow, I said this yesterday, we're going to see what they do for the rest of the week. But if they don't get to this thing tomorrow, we're going to try and figure out what the heck's going on, why they keep skipping it. In the meantime, we have to clear something up here. Because there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of misdirection, and people just outright lying and trying to pass the buck and try to pass blame on what is about to occur on March 2nd, which is the GOP caucus. Now, look, I'm not here to necessarily be highly partisan, but let's face it. The things that we fight for on this program, the folks that we believe in, the liberty legislators, if you will, that come onto this program, they're all Republicans. So the Republican primary in this state is extremely important. This is a, quote, red state. And so when it comes to Republican issues, they have major ramifications and they matter. And this is legislative business. So I want to cover some things here. We've had Dorothy Moon, the chairwoman of the Idaho State Republican Party, on the program at least twice now to talk about the caucus that's happening March 2nd. And each time we do, and we've had other folks on, we talk about how we got into this situation. There have been mailers and hit pieces put out against Dorothy Moon, blaming her for disenfranchising deployed military folks, people who are infirmed or can't get out of the house when they go vote, for having no mail-in ballots because of this caucus that's happening. But what they're trying to do is gaslight you. And I need to correct the record. We need to go back to 2023 when House Bill 138 was presented. House Bill 138 was presented as being a bill that would eliminate the March election, thus saving the state money and removing the ability for school districts to keep running these levies over and over and over again. People were getting pretty tired of having to re-vote on levies and bonds every 6 months when they failed, or sometimes sooner than that. So they said that they were coming in to remove the March elections, which also contained the presidential primary. But I went and looked back at the bill, okay? And the bill was poorly written because it certainly did remove the presidential primary election. It removed the language from this bill. But if you see here, the statement of purpose on this bill specifically states that this legislation consolidation of the March presidential primary election, it seeks to consolidate the March presidential primary election with the May primary election, and put all primary elections will be held on the third Tuesday in May. So for the folks out there that were saying, well, no, this bill was just to eliminate the March elections for school districts to hold levies, to get that under control. Well, nowhere in the legislation does it talk about that. All it does is put lines through the presidential primary, which was the big mistake. This was the big mistake that whoever wrote this bill, and some are saying that it came from Phil McGrain's office, the Secretary of State, that they went in and they just X'd out presidential primary throughout this entire bill. They just X'd it out, and they never fixed it. They never moved it. All they did was define what the elections were going to be in May, and thus ending the March election. So House Bill 138, all it did was remove exactly what the statement of purpose said it was going to do. And yet you got people out there going, no, this wasn't why we were doing it. But this is exactly why it was doing it. It says it right there. Representative Dustin Manwaring presented the bill, and Senator Mark Harris carried it in the Senate. Okay, so then that bill goes through, and then people notice, hey, if this bill gets signed, we're not going to have a presidential primary at all because this legislation didn't do that. So then the Senate came along and said, okay, well we'll have what they call a trailer bill. Let's have the governor sign that bill, and then we'll pass this next bill, which was Senate Bill 1186. And Senate Bill 1186 said, this bill follows the one we just went over, and it will put the presidential primary in May. Right? Well, the problem that everybody had with that was that by putting the presidential primary in May, it made Idaho completely irrelevant in Republicans and perhaps Democrats, but at least on the Republican schedule, it made it completely irrelevant to choosing the nominee for president. And it was so close to some deadlines that the National Party had that there was a risk that Idaho wouldn't even be able to send delegates. So having the primary in May was not an option for the Republican Party. And so they opposed this trailer bill because they did not want to see the Republican primary in May. They wanted it put back in March. And so that's what happened. And then this bill never went through. So after all that was known, guess what happened? The bill was sitting on Governor Little's desk. And after all of this happened, after everybody knew exactly what was going on, All he had to do was veto the bill, and then everything would have went back to normal. And we would have had a March primary for the president. We would have had everything would have stayed to normal. All he had to do was veto the bill. And then everybody in the legislature would have went like, "Oh, you're right. You're right." And we're guessing, we would assume we would have encouraged them to not override the veto. And then we wouldn't be in this mess. But you know what he did? After knowing all of that, after knowing everything that I explained to you, that if he signed this bill, the presidential primary was gone. It wouldn't go to May. It wouldn't go anywhere. It was gone. And so he signed it, knowing all of that. And the paper trail is there. The receipts are there. So what happened? Well, what happened? Well, Dorothy Moon said, well, we got to do a caucus. We got to do something to get this back. And then she worked with the party. There were other solutions to try and come back into session to bring the primary back, to do a special session, to pass a bill, to bring it in May, to bring it in March. But time ticked, and nobody got on board. Your legislature still didn't come back to do it. So the private party, the private Republican Party said, if the legislature's not going to fix this problem, then we're going to do the next best thing and hold a caucus. And that's the only thing that we can do, is hold a caucus. It won't cost us millions of dollars, and at least we'll have some say. And at least those who are able to attend the caucus will have some say. We feel bad. We feel badly that deployed veterans and folks that can't make it out of the House won't be able to make it. They won't be able to make it. But that problem lies squarely at the feet of Governor Little for signing that bill, and everybody else who encouraged him to do so, or whoever else was behind the scenes talking about that. So I am making that crystal clear exactly what happened. That's what happened. And so anybody out there getting mailers, getting stuff in the mail that says, oh, Dorothy Moon is screwing over people, is an absolute lie. Absolute lie. We should be thanking Dorothy Moon. If you're a Republican who's going to show up on March 2nd, we should be thanking Dorothy Moon. She's not a representative anymore. But we should be thanking Dorothy Moon and the party for working hard to make sure that Idaho has some sort of say at whatever level. Okay, enough of that. Let's move on. Let's move on. We've lost tons of viewers because of that, but that's okay. We're moving on. All right. Here is what is going on in the this morning. This is incredible news this morning in the House Health and Welfare Committee. There's a bill that's being presented that will repeal the needle exchange program in Idaho. In case you didn't know it, folks, we in 2019 a bill passed that allowed for the Department of Health and Welfare to engage in needle exchange programs. This, of course, is under the guise that drug users are using dirty needles and sharing dirty needles, and thus contracting communicable diseases and other sorts of complications from using bad needles. And so rather than start building up the morgue with bodies because of dirty needles, that we would have a needle exchange program where users could come and exchange a dirty needle for a clean needle, and hopefully get some other support, but that's another story. But I'm just laying out the facts here. So in 2019, Representative Megan Blanksma presented this bill. It passed. It got signed into law. And here it is. This yeah. So this was the bill. I have it here. And it had some concerns, obviously, because there's folks that live in big cities. You might be watching if you've lived in Seattle or Portland or Los Angeles or San Francisco, where these programs exist, and there's all sorts of data on both sides of the fence here that show how much it helps or how much it's hurting. That being said, anybody who in 2019 who opposed this bill because they saw it as a slippery slope to something worse, well, my friends, you have been validated, because the original sponsor of that needle program bill stood up this morning in in committee to say this program got out of hand. Gee, what a shock. So this is Representative Megan Blanksma in the committee this morning, talking about how she is supporting this bill and wants to see this bill go through that would repeal this needle exchange program. So let's take a look at that.
I'd love to speak to my motion. The department has abused this section of code for years. It was intended for what these ladies said in a one-to-one exchange to try to get people help. And instead, the department has abused it by their rule promulgation. The good chairman and I have both tried to rein it in, tried to revamp it, tried to work within the code and the department to make it an effective program according to what the intention was of the original code. The department, as we all know, is fond of promulgating their own rules, going their own way, and ignoring what is in Idaho statute. And that's why this continues to be a problem. You can't fix this by putting a shall in there because it's still rule promulgation authority. So that's why I support what the chairman's doing. This is the right thing to do to get rid of this code as written. And while I agree with the testimony that we need to provide people with help, this section of code needs to be completely rewritten. And we're at a time in session where I don't know that we can accomplish that. And I definitely know that we can't accomplish it through rulemaking authority. And so that's why I made the motion to support the bill.
Okay, so a couple of things here. Is first thing, she's saving her butt here, okay, because she does not want to be the one that is on the hook for this fiasco. And I'm telling you this is a fiasco because this is news that I learned this morning, that just a few weeks ago, down there in the Treasure Valley, was a story broke that at one of these needle exchange centers, there was a raid. Law enforcement did a raid on a needle exchange program. Here's the story right here. Idaho Health and Welfare to review syringe exchange programs following a harm reduction project raid. The Harm Reduction Project, that's the name of the program. And there was a raid at one of the facilities that uncovered all sorts of drug paraphernalia for cocaine, for crack cocaine, methamphetamines, all sorts, and possibly drugs as well. There's an investigation going on right now, and this is your Idaho Department of Health and Welfare that is subsidizing this program. So 5 years ago, they said, "Oh, this is just going to be a program that's going to help drug addicts and stop the spread of HIV." Well, here's where your tax dollars went. So there's a huge scandal that broke. Huge scandal. This is extraordinary, and we know it's a huge scandal because the bill's original sponsor is like, whoa! I had no idea this was going to happen. Oh, really? There were plenty of people out there that goes, this is what happens when you start doing this program. This is what happens. You start giving public dollars to give needles because you don't want to advance HIV and all this stuff. This is what's going to happen. It's incredible. Can you imagine? I posted this morning. Can you imagine if the government said, well, you know what? There's so many drug addicts. They rob convenience stores. They do home invasions looking for cash and items to sell for money to pay for their drugs. And that it's such a harm on society. So rather than have them do that, we're just going to cut them a check so they can go buy their own drugs, or we're just going to give them the drugs themselves. But imagine if they just cut a check to drug users. Oh, use this money to, a SNAP card for drugs. You got your food stamps and you got your drug stamps. Can you imagine? This is appalling. This is appalling. So this morning, House Bill 617, that was the bill that Megan Blanksma was all of a sudden championing now, was being presented by the chairman of the Health and Welfare Committee. And it was a close vote. You had a lot of folks coming in. The ACLU was there. All these folks coming in saying how important this was and da-da-da-da. You had a public commenter in there who went in there and said, when I heard about this, that you guys were doing this, I thought, well, do you guys want to be Seattle? I mean, it's incredible. So this also just highlights what a sewer this place is. So they passed. So this was the thing. They passed this bill with good intentions, right? And then the bill makes its way into law, right? And then the health and welfare look at the statute, and then they develop their own rules, right? We've talked about rules on this show before. How the departments just like they look at the rules and they find every which way possible to use those rules to bypass what the law is and the intent of the law, right? And so this is what happens when these bureaucrats in these departments they run amok. This is the out of control government. This is why government spending, this is why government expansion is harmful to our society. And so now they're in there trying to fix it. There were some people that saying, well, let's make this bill, let's have it change the language of what it is so that way there can be more oversight. No, get rid of the program. Get rid of the program. We don't need to be using tax dollars to be sending to programs that are exchanging clean needles for dirty needles so people can go be drug addicts. Am I nuts? Am I nuts? Sure, a lot of you will say I am nuts, but that's not nuts. Okay, so that's what happened with the needle exchange program. It passed committee. So if you're concerned about this issue, that's a good applause. H617, it passed the Health and Welfare Committee, and it will make its way to the floor, where I am certain we're going to be hearing a lot of debate on this issue. But you cannot tell me that with this scandal that happened at this needle exchange center, where other illicit drug paraphernalia and possibly drugs, and like it just became like, what would it just become, an opium den? Where was this? This was somewhere in Boise. It had to be, right? In the Treasure Valley, Caldwell, Boise, somewhere in that region. It's incredible. It's incredible. Okay, so we're going to stay on top of that. We thank the good representatives who voted to pass this bill and try and fix this mess. But this is what happens when you play with fire. And it's very interesting that Representative Blanksmo is like, whoa, I this giant fiasco, all signs would have pointed to her. Well, who passed this law? Oh, she did. Well, I don't know. I don't want to give any tips out there to anybody who might be running against her, but this is a horrible look. This is a horrible, and this is why we can't have nice things, right? Not that this is a nice thing, but it's a funny phrase that I like to use. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. We'll catch up and see if there's anything interesting happening in the House, and we'll get to it. But we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
It's our job to maintain the proper role of government and what we were tasked to do.
Idaho is a conservative state. That's why leftist billionaires and woke progressives are pushing the ranked choice runoff scheme. Their goal, a radical anti-gun equity agenda. Repeal stand your ground and constitutional carry and pass red flag gun confiscation. This is about taking our guns, destroying our freedom, radicalizing Idaho, and changing our state forever. Stop them before it's too late. Open primaries and ranked choice voting will destroy Idaho. Don't let leftist billionaires turn our state into California.
There's a saying in Idaho, Esto perpetua. It is forever. But the truth is, nothing lasts forever. Not without a fight. The Gem State is ours to fight for. It is ours to win. For life and liberty, for honesty and integrity. We ride together.
All right, we are back. I want to take they might be going into some interesting business on the House floor. So guys, can we dip into the House floor here and see what's going on? I don't hear it yet. Is that on my end?
Would you like to explain, Mr. Chairman?
I would. Well, I will do my best on that. The sponsor indicated that there were some fixes that he'd like to do on that particular bill, so that's at the request of the sponsor.
Thank you, gentlemen. Unanimous consent has been requested to refer House Concurrent Resolution 24 to general orders. Their objection. Unanimous order, and the bill will be transmitted to general orders. Gentleman 22.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that the remaining bills on the third reading calendar hold their place one legislative day.
Unanimous consent has been requested to hold the remaining bills on the third reading calendar one legislative day. Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered, and the bills will be held their place on the third reading calendar one legislative day. The House will now advance to the 15th order of business, announcements.
All right, everybody. It's nearing the top of the hour there, so they are going to be set to adjourn. So that's all the business that they did there today. Sending a bill to general orders just mean they're going to amend it, and they're going to let the body debate the bill and possibly amend it. And so they will go through that. All right. Well, we want to move on here. Yesterday, in the House State Affairs Committee, the House Joint Memorial 8 was up for a public hearing. And this is the memorial that we had Representative Dale Hawkins on to discuss. This addressed border security and impeaching the president for the lack of enforcing the border. And so there was a lot of testimony. We've talked about this multiple times with some folks. But yesterday, Vice President of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, Fred Birnbaum, was there, and he delivered some fantastic remarks regarding the concerns that we have in our country and in our state. And so we have his 2 minutes that we want to play, and then we'll walk through that, and then we'll invite Fred on. But let's watch Fred's testimony yesterday in the House State Affairs Committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Fred Birnbaum, the Idaho Freedom Foundation. I stand strongly in support of HJM 08. There's an old adage: in order to solve a problem, you have to properly define it. The reason we have an immigration invasion, as it was related by Representative Hawkins, is President Joe Biden has taken dozens of administrative actions to facilitate that invasion. Just a fact. He ended the Migration Protection Protocol, also known as Remain in Mexico. I won't restate all of those, but the purpose of this memorial is to make it a priority of Congress to remove the man who should be held accountable. The buck stops with Joe Biden. President Joe Biden. He has done these things. It's documented. It started day one. He even telegraphed it during the campaign. I'm going to open the border. He's done that. So for people to say we need targeted immigration reform, if the current president will not enforce current laws, why would passing new laws fix that? He's not enforcing current laws. He's not allowed to do what he's doing. He's twisting the law the way he has twisted the laws as it relates to student debt. He's doing that with immigration. So that's why this memorial is so important in calling for his impeachment. He is doing these things. It's a conscious decision. Secondarily, if you look at page 2 and you look at the precedence of the language, it says Congress should prioritize laws further tightening border security and immigration before funding the war in Ukraine. The problem we have in Congress, and this goes back to 1986, they haven't been able to agree. So we're going to wait. So we've waited almost 40 years for agreement, and now they're going to get it in the next 9 months. We have competing proposals. H.R. 2 would do what the agricultural folks want. So the point is, we need these two things before the third, and the third would essentially say if H.R. 2 didn't do it, then we could address perhaps other needs of labor. But if you do not properly define a problem, you will not solve it, and this president needs to be held accountable. And I see my time has expired, so I'll wrap up. And I would just say, though, we should not throw out the baby with the bathwater on those lines 40 to 42, because that's not really the thrust of this document. The thrust is what's called for in the second page. Thank you, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Birnbaum.
Okay, fantastic summary there. Fred Birnbaum joins us now. Hello, Fred. Welcome to the program. You were asked several questions from the folks up there, and I want to play an exchange with Representative Gannon that you had, which I thought was fantastic. But we'll hold that for a minute or so. What was your reaction to a lot of the arguments being made against this bill yesterday, and where do you think we're headed now?
Matt, first off, great to be here. I just have to let you know up front, I only have about maybe 15 minutes this morning because a lot's going on. So the bill did get sent to the floor. The opposition to the bill came primarily from three groups: the food producers, the Farm Bureau, and then the dairymen. And, I respect our ag industries. I think everyone does. And I think to some extent their opposition was misplaced. And I'll speak to why that was so. On lines 40 to 42, first page of the bill, it starts with, whereas the thirst for cheap immigrant labor in Idaho has created a conduit for human trafficking and drugs and other related, like fentanyl and other related drugs. So they obviously didn't like thirst for cheap immigrant labor. And so some of the conversation got sidetracked by those lines. And my overarching argument was, well, maybe that's not the best choice of language from the perspective of a dairyman or big ag, but where we concluded in the bill with the three asks, which I have this right here, or I should say the memorial, with the impeachment of Biden and the passage of H.R. 2, that's the important part of this. The exchange with Gannon, I want to get to separately a little later, and I'll tell you why. And I do want to emphasize for your listeners something that's very important, and that is there is a competing memorial, Senate Joint Memorial 102, and all it calls for is targeted immigration reform. And people need to understand, everybody's been asking that for decades. We've all heard it. And what it allows effectively is the impasse, the stalemate in Congress. And while the stalemate takes place, millions of people come in, right? So we can't agree, therefore just let millions in. Well, who's letting the millions in? Joe Biden is. And he has taken as many executive actions as possible, and as I mentioned in my testimony, to facilitate the invasion. People act like this is some sort of accident or maybe maladministration. It is not. It's a conscious policy decision to essentially replace the historic American nation with as many people from the third world as possible. Some people don't want to say that. It's a factually correct statement.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I mean, there's no denying when we look at it that these are conscious decisions to facilitate this invasion for whatever purposes, whatever, and there are many folks coming across that have many different reasons for coming across, if you're talking about bad actors here. So yeah, so this is an extremely important memorial. And when you look at, and I think I maybe have asked you this last time, would you be comfortable if both memorials passed, or is there really something inherently bad with the Senate version?
Great question. And it's important for your listeners to understand the distinction. So as I mentioned briefly earlier and in my testimony, the Senate version has all these nice whereas clauses and actually say some of the same things that this House version. But the Senate memorial concludes with the twice repeated ask, targeted immigration reform. And the problem with that is that isn't going to happen in the short term, because the Senate and the House aren't on the same page, and the Republicans and the Democrats aren't on the same page, and the Biden administration certainly isn't. And we saw that with the collapse of what I would call the Senator Langford negotiated border deal, which was wrapped into the package of Ukraine and Israel aid. And actually, when Representative Gannon asked me that question, he got it wrong. And I didn't respond by trying to correct him, because there were two bills that came very quickly, but I do want to speak to that. So what happened was Senator Langford was told by Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, go negotiate with the Democrats some sort of border deal where we can graft that onto the Ukraine aid package, the 90 billion plus. And he came back with that. And of course, it was terrible. And even the Farm Bureau acknowledged that yesterday, by the way. It would still allow thousands of people to come in a day until, drastic actions were facilitated. So in other words, all it would do is reduce a flood to a torrent. So instead of having a flood, we just have a torrent. And of course, what happened was McConnell read the tea leaves and the Senate killed it.
And maybe McConnell, being the crafty man that he was, realized, well, they'll kill it. And the next night, they had that late night debate, and they sent to the House a Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan package that had no border deal. And they happened right after. And I think Representative Gannon got it wrong, and I'm not faulting him. So my response, I said it was a fig leaf border deal with the Ukraine aid package. But the reality is it never actually made it out of the Senate. But had it, it would have been a bad deal. That's why the Republican conservatives in the Senate, such as there are, said no deal.
Right.
And they backed away and it collapsed. So I think that further anchors the point that if the Republicans want a deal, the Democrats are only going to give them a bad one.
Yeah. Well,
So-
let's play that clip real quick. That exchange with you and Gannon real quick.
Sure.
You got
Gannon.
that queued up, guys?
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, here we go.
Chairman, and Mr. Birnbaum, and we miss you. We haven't seen you here lately, but I wonder if you're open to amending this resolution to include a call for removal of the Speaker of the House as Speaker of the House because he refuses to hear a bipartisan bill that passed the Senate with more than a 60-vote margin. He's put the bill in his drawer. He's obstructed the legislative process. And by doing so, we have no resolution, no solution, and no democracy in the United States Congress. Would you be interested in including that in your resolution?
Well, I think, Representative Gannon, that probably should be directed at the bill's sponsor. So do you want to hold that question for the bill sponsor? Bill sponsor, you might be prepared to answer that, okay?
Could I comment briefly
You're
on
welcome
that?
to comment on
that. Just on the, Mr. Chairman and Representative Gannon, I think there are a couple inaccuracies in that. So yes, the Langford Compromise with the Ukraine money did pass the Senate. However, H.R. 2 passed the House. So you could just as equally say that we should impeach Charles Schumer, Senator Schumer from New York, for not even taking up H.R. 2. And as the gentleman from the Farm Bureau acknowledged, they don't support the Langford Compromise simply because it still lets, instead of maybe 3 million streaming in a year, it'll be 1.5 million. So it's not actually doing anything. It was basically designed to get money to Ukraine and Israel and support Taiwan with a fig leaf of border security. So we'll call it the fig leaf compromise. And I don't think you should impeach the speaker for opposing the fig leaf compromise.
Excellent. Yeah, there it was, the fig leaf compromise. Let's hope that permeates throughout the nation there, Fred. Great points there, and it begs the question, what is everybody paying attention to? How do they decipher these things? And they're not being very genuine when they're just picking and choosing their battles here and their arguments.
So, and I have to state this at the outset, when I acknowledged it passed the Senate, it actually would pass the Senate was the bill that was right behind the Langford Compromise. So that failed. And then the bill that Johnson's holding is the Ukraine aid bill, stripped of any border language. So it was one of these things where maybe McConnell was being clever. Maybe that's why he doesn't have his job anymore or stepped down, where he put something forth that was unpalatable and said, okay, the Senate can't do this bad border bill with Ukraine. It fails. So we're just going to give Ukraine and Israel $90 billion and just call it good. And of course, that bill did pass. And that's the one that the speaker doesn't want to pass because he knows, and here is the tie back in, if that passes, Biden won't care about the border. He'll have the money for Ukraine. So the border was the leverage. And the Democrats used the leverage better because they did a lousy border deal with the $90 billion, and McConnell said it's great. Then he realized it wasn't, so he let it fail, and he actually at the end, I guess, flipped against it. I don't know if he voted against it, but he allowed it to fail in the Senate. So this goes back to the overarching point. This Congress. So people say, "Well, get it done, get a deal done, target immigration reform." You have to, that sort of presupposes that the Democrats and the Republicans want the same things. We don't. Biden wants the country flooded with the third world to change the demographic makeup. That actually it goes back decades. In the 2016 Democratic presidential debate, most of the candidates for president, this is before Obviously, Hillary won in 26, or I'm sorry, yeah, she won the nomination. She lost the election. But the debate, the candidates on the stage, most of them didn't even believe in a border. If you can, I mean, I'm going back a number of years. And Biden, when he got elected in 2020, as he was campaigning, signaled, that, and then he made these false claims that, well, this is our system and how it works. Well, no law has changed since Biden relative to immigration was elected since Trump. What he's done is he's used executive action like he tried to do with the student loan forgiveness. And he basically has twisted the law, knowing that Congress doesn't seem to have the will to impeach him. Congress, the Democratic Congress, impeached Donald Trump over one phone call to Ukraine, but the Republicans don't seem to be able to impeach Joe Biden over willfully ignoring the immigration law. And the way he's done that, I know I'm going into a lot of detail, but the current law says if you want to be an asylee, and there are other reasons you can get into the country, you have to, one of three things. The U.S. government will detain you until the time of your hearing, and we don't have enough beds. And Biden knows that, especially when he says, come one, come all. Or people can be selectively released if there's a high probability, that their case is valid and they'll return. Third, and this was the brilliance of the Trump administration, they can be required to remain in a third country, to remain in Mexico. Well, the Mexican government wasn't going to let 8 million or 7 million people camp out there, right? Passing them through was fine because that gives the cartels all this money to sort of become the gatekeeper for these people. So Trump had negotiated the Migration Protection Protocol, remain in Mexico. One of the first things Biden did was say, it's over. We're terminating that. And that was probably the biggest one. So that's why HJM 8 is much more effective than the other one. The other one is targeted immigration reform. That's SJM 102. This starts by saying, I'm going to read the language for your listeners. The number one point, United States House of Representatives should impeach President Biden for the high crime of willfully failing to enforce existing immigration law and sanctioning invasion of the United States by millions of military-aged men.
Yeah.
And then
there it is.
Yeah. Now, therefore, be it resolved. I'll just read the end of this. The Idaho legislature requests and calls upon the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States Congress to take action with all deliberate speed to adopt and implement actions against the Biden administration's lawlessness and treason, consistent with the action items set forth in this joint memorial.
Yeah.
That's what's got the establishment aflutter. They, treason, impeach. But that is why this memorial is important. Will it actually do anything? No. But just think if Idaho, as a red state with an 80% Republican legislature, sent SJM 102 to Congress, it would be another squid flapping its tentacles. We're a squid, we're flapping our tentacles, target immigration reform. No, this is the president is treasonous, he's sanctioned invasion, impeach him. And if they ignore it, fine. The legislature, which represents the people of Idaho, is on record calling the president of the United States conduct treasonous.
Right.
Invasion.
I hear the number 7 million people just since he's been in office, President Biden. 7 million. That's 3 Idahos fold, at least. Right. That's incredible.
And we don't even know because the Border Patrol's data seems to be lagging.
Right.
And they track what they call the contacts they make, and then how many are led through this way. And then they have a thing called gotaways, the people that they don't actually process.
Sure.
So we really don't even know. It's in the millions. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I think if you add it all up, it's probably somewhere around 7 or 8 million. We don't even know because the people who are really dangerous aren't coming and asking, at the port of entry for, they might be on some list. They're going over the mountain pass at 3 a.m. with the backpack.
Right.
And they know the Border Patrol is busy processing the flood of people showing up at Del Rio.
Yeah, it's incredible. All right. Well, Fred, thank you so much for staying on top of this and bringing such clear, concise, sanity to this argument. That's what they need down there. So it's good to see you down there. Fred Birnbaum, thank you again. We'll have you back.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's great to be here.
All right. Take care. All right, folks, we will take a quick break and we will be back real quick.
All Idaho lawmakers swear an oath to support the Idaho and U.S. constitutions. But how's that working out for you? Because not all Idaho lawmakers share the same values. That's where the Citizens Alliance of Idaho Pledge comes in. 10 statements inspired by those two founding documents that are designed to preserve our shared values. Values such as education freedom, safeguarding free speech, defending our protected right to self-defense, and being responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. When a lawmaker signs the pledge, they are performing an act of political courage, accepting the challenge to be a champion for our values, and serving with political integrity. To find out if your lawmaker signed the pledge, visit idahopledge.com. Paid for by Citizens Alliance of Idaho. We ride together.
Okay, we are back, and the House and both the Senate have adjourned for the day, so they will try again tomorrow with some of the important tasks of Idaho and the people. Yesterday, we had a lot of activity in the House State Affairs Committee, and we shared some. There was a long hearing on, I can't even remember what the heck it was before, but after all that was done, Representative Joe Alfieri presented an election security bill. This is House Bill 470, and we do have some clips. And you give me a thumbs up. Do we have those? I had sent them. Joe's presentation we have. So let's listen to, we may not listen to the entire thing, but let's listen to Joe Alfieri present House Bill 470 yesterday in the House State Affairs Committee.
And representatives, my name is Joe Alfieri, representative for District 4, which encompasses Coeur d'Alene. And I bring before you this morning House Bill 470, which is the Idaho Election Crimes Act. The bill is about protecting the integrity and security of our electoral process. And in short, it establishes an election crimes and security office within the Office of the Attorney General. The primary purpose of the office would be to investigate and respond to complaints or allegations of election crimes, ensuring that the electoral process remains free from fraud and misconduct. The urgency for establishing an office is dedicated to election crimes and security is paramount in the current climate where election integrity has been increasingly scrutinized and criticized with some of the election results we've seen across the country. Recent elections within Idaho and across the nation have spotlighted the vulnerabilities of the election process and raised significant concerns regarding the potential for fraud and misconduct. And you have heard me, I think in the past, if you recall, talk about some of the potential election crimes that have been brought to my attention by some of my constituents. These concerns, these irregularities and procedural errors are maybe outright attempts to manipulate outcomes, or they do cast a long shadow over the election process. But by proactively creating an office solely focused on addressing and preventing election fraud, we're responding to these concerns, and hopefully these decisive steps will help fortify the elections against any future threats. The Election Crimes and Security Office would have the authority to receive and investigate complaints from any individual regarding election law violations. The office may also initiate independent inquiries into alleged election law violations, and their authority would include receiving sworn statements, issuing subpoenas for the records, and even entering polling places or elections office to investigate the alleged violations. Such capabilities are essential for addressing issues swiftly and effectively, ensuring that any attempts to undermine our electoral process are dealt with promptly. And most importantly, Election Crimes and Security Office would establish a voter fraud hotline to receive reports of irregularities. from Idaho citizens, giving voters a place to go where they have concerns about the electoral system. And this was some of the things that I have talked about in the past, where I have had people come to me and say, I went to vote and I was told I'd already voted. What do I do? Furthermore, the bill allows for concurrent investigative and prosecutorial authority with county prosecutors, ensuring that the findings of election law violations can be addressed at the appropriate level, whether it's at the local, state, or federal level. The bill also mandates annual reporting to the governor and to ourselves, to the legislative leaders, providing transparency on the number of complaints received. It would be ideal if we come back with no complaints. However, that may not happen. The transparency is critical to maintaining the public trust in the electoral process and ensuring accountability within this new office that we will be establishing. Some may argue that this is overreach or unnecessary scrutiny of the election process. However, it's the scrutiny that's important because it will ensure to the public that we are maintaining our republic by protecting our election process. I would ask you to support this.
All right, there we have it. Fantastic. Okay, so, election integrity, election security, a big deal, as we know, across the country. And while, the main headlines across the country when it comes to election security and election integrity don't necessarily emanate from Idaho, there are still concerns. There are still matters that we want to make sure don't come to Idaho. And having a proper, real investigative team on standby to deal with these issues, should they arise, as Representative Alfieri has mentioned, do arise, we need to address them. And they need to be done outside of, they need to be done by our chief law enforcement mechanism in the state, which is through the Attorney General's office. Representative Joe Alfieri was just left the floor, and I believe he joins us now. So let's bring him in here. Representative Alfieri, welcome to the program. We wanted to play the clip in full of presenting so we could get everybody up to speed on what this bill does. There was an exchange. Secretary of State Phil McGrain, who oversees elections, stood up and didn't necessarily say he was opposed to the bill per se, but that he had wished he was consulted on the makeup of this bill. And I think there was some good back and forth and discussion on that. Maybe we'll play some clips later. But I wanted to get your take on that because it seems like there's a lot of there's just a lot of information out there when it comes to who should be responsible for investigating crimes, regardless of what departments they may happen in. We had a story on earlier this morning about the Health and Welfare Committee. That's appalling. But that being said, welcome to the program, sir. What can you shed some light on here?
Hi, Matt. It's good to see you. I want to talk about the Secretary of State because I think that's a fair concern that they were not involved, and I do apologize for that. It just seemed logical to me that law enforcement authorities, the Attorney General, was a logical place to start this.
Oh, did we lose Joe's microphone here? I can't hear him, guys. Can you hear him? No, can't hear you, Joe. I don't know if you hit a button or something. We just lost you. Well, let's I tell you what, don't hear you. Let's play this exchange with Joe. Representative Young had a question for the Secretary of State after the Secretary of State voiced his concern on what happened. So let's play this exchange between Representative Young and Secretary McGrain.
And I believe that I also heard you say that you have cooperated with law enforcement and prosecutors in pursuing past violations of election law. You don't, however, oversee or have primary responsibility for the investigation or prosecution of those crimes, do you? Or would you like to clarify?
Secretary McGrain.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Young, currently for the state of Idaho, no, I do not. That is not within the scope of the authority of the Secretary of State. In other states, Secretaries of State are granted authority for the investigative and law enforcement work. An example of that, like I mentioned, is Cord Bird for the Secretary of State for Florida, which this legislation is modeled after.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. McGrain. Does it not raise a separation of powers concern in your mind to think that the individual or the department responsible to execute or to carry out the election would also be responsible to investigate or prosecute?
Secretary McGrain.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Young, I think first and foremost, separation of powers, the Attorney General and I are both members of the executive branch, so we actually work cooperatively. He is my attorney, I should note, so that's required under law. And so I don't see a separation of powers here. And actually our role as the...
Okay, so PBS television lost the visual and the feed of that, so we only have the audio. So that happens apparently. Maybe you guys can fix that somehow. But anyway, so that was an interesting exchange there, and you had a great response, and I don't know if it was ever captured on camera, where you said, when a bank robbery happens, you don't ask the bank manager to investigate, you call in the cops, and so that's kind of it was a nice analogy there. But I wanted to get your take on that. However, you were in the middle of something else too. So if you have that thought too, I just want to let you run with it.
Well, is the audio good now?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Great, excellent. Okay, my take is, or what I wanted to say is that when I looked at this legislation last year, between sessions, I looked at the Florida legislation, which was the model that this is based on, and the Florida legislation did include the Secretary of State. But I didn't understand why that was the case, because it seemed to me that the Attorney General's office was the likely place to begin, because that's where prosecution is done. You had to go statewide, so you had to go to the Attorney General rather than to each jurisdiction of prosecutor across the state. You couldn't go county to county; you had to go to the state level. So the AG's office seemed like the logical place to start, and that's what we did. We went with the AG. In hindsight, I wish I had at least had a conversation with the Secretary of State, and I did this morning run into the Secretary in the hallway and did ask to sit down with him. We were going to do that after our State Affairs meeting, but the State Affairs meeting went right to the timeline when the House session was beginning, so I wasn't able to do that. But I will get together with him, and we'll patch it up. Yeah, if he's on the side of the legislation, obviously there's no issue. If he generally likes legislation, I don't think there's an issue at all.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, especially and I think when you are in that position, you want all the help you can get. I mean, I don't know any government agency that would say no, we want to keep it all in house here. If you can have help and it's all for the betterment of our society in terms of securing our elections, this is what we want. So, all right. So, we don't
want to have a turf war. No, not at all.
Exactly. So so it ended up passing the committee. So you'll be presenting it on the floor hopefully soon. Where do you expect this to go? I mean, do you think do you think your conversations with the secretary will force you to move this bill, to an amending order, or come back with a different RS later? What do you expect?
I don't think he had any specific objections to any item in the bill. We'll find out. I hope we don't have to go to an amending order, because that could prevent passage, because we're kind of in a short timeline. We've got a month until sign a day, at least theoretically. We'll see what happens. But I hopefully we can get this to the floor in short order. I'm hoping it gets there next week. It'll pass the House. I'm confident of that. And I think we'll be fine in the Senate. So I really don't see an issue, especially if we have both the AG and the Secretary of State on board with this. I think we're going to be fine.
Excellent. Good. All right, Joe. Well, thank you for coming in. I'm sorry we had a little bit of difficulties here, but I want to make sure people know where to support you and find out where they can keep tabs on what you're up to.
Thank you. Joe for Idaho is my website. Keeping tabs on me, go onto the House Legislative website and look at what we're doing. Call me in the office, send me an email. I can never remember the email. It's so complicated. It's jalfieri@house.idaho.gov. Send me an email.
Perfect.
You get a lot of emails. I will tell you, if I don't attend to them over the weekend, we've got 400 to 500 on Monday morning to go through. So if I do not respond to your email, it is not that I'm ignoring you. I probably haven't been able to get to it. So I apologize for that in advance.
Fair enough. No, you're doing good work down there, and hopefully a lot of those emails are praise for the good work that you're doing. So
A fair amount are. Not a whole phrase.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, Representative Joe Alfieri, thank you so much for joining us. And tomorrow's Friday, and then have a great weekend.
Thank you. You have a great one as well.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye now.
All right, folks. Well, that brings us to the end here. I wanted to play a quick clip because last weekend, Joe Alfieri and many of, almost all of the Kootenai County legislators who represent some part of Kootenai County were back home in Kootenai County for a town hall. And Representative Tony Wisniewski had some concerns with some of the language that one of his colleagues was using, and wanted to address it publicly. And so we thought that it was a bit concerning and wanted to share that with you. So let's watch this clip.
I take exception to something that my esteemed colleague Elaine said. Boise and Washington, D.C. are not swamps. Swamps are part of God's ecological. They are not swamps. We're denigrating God's creation. These are sewers.
Okay. We thank CDA Freedom Watch for capturing that footage and sharing it. Folks, thank you so much for joining us as we keep tabs on the sewer that is down there in Boise. You can support us. Head over to idahosignal.com. Send us a message. Send us some love there, and we'll keep tabs. I hope you make the most of this extra day of the year. I feel like we certainly have, at least for this hour. We will check back with you tomorrow. We hope to see you then. Thank you. Take care.
This bill, I think, it puts a stake in the ground that says we have a sovereign right to protect what's ours.